Welcome to Minority Trip Report. MTR is a podcast spotlighting stories of personal transformation and underrepresented leaders in mental health, psychedelics, and consciousness. I'm your host, Raj Siraj. If you're learning from or enjoying Minority Trip Report, please subscribe to MTR on YouTube at Minority Trip Report and follow us on Instagram at Minority Trip. Thank you and enjoy the episode. Today, my guest is Brandon Deroche, who founded Propeller in 2015. Propeller creates and leads social impact campaigns for some of the largest personalities in the world, from Lizzo and Justin Bieber to Bon Iver. The digital marketing platform works at the crossroads of culture and social impact to connect causes with new audiences and drive measurable action. Brandon, how you doing, man?
Not bad.
Did I say your last name right? Deroche?
Deroche, yeah, I think you did.
Okay, cool. This episode has been months in the making. Summer tends to get really wild and crazy, so apologize for the multiple rescheduling, but we're here and now, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. No worries.
Let's start by checking in. How was your summer? And I asked that not only because I don't know how your summer was, but also busy time for music, culture, creativity, shows, all that stuff, all the different worlds that you're involved in.
Yeah, I think summer was good. It was such a blur. I feel like I can't keep track of time at all these days. And if I had to piece all together, I'm not sure I could, but I usually have some different markers throughout the summer, which are different festivals that we're always a part of and things like that help me compartmentalize things a bit. And so for me, I think for work, it was really the summer of Chappell Roan. So that was a big part of really the whole year, but especially summertime, which I'm happy to talk more about.
What is that, since we're on the topic?
Chappell Roan, which I assume you're familiar with who she is at this point.
Dude, it's embarrassing to say I actually don't.
Maybe that's a Canadian thing. I'm not sure, but that's actually refreshing.
Yeah.
But Chappell Roan is an artist that just had a rocket ship of a year. She's been
and I'm like, what is that? Oh, it's a person. Okay. All right. That's how clueless I am. Yeah. Sorry.
That is her artist name, but she was like the phenomenon of the year. I feel like the past couple of years we had like Zach Bryan and Noah Khan, these different artists that had these rocket ship. They might have been around for a bit, like in case of Noah, but then just whatever reason, TikTok or something just blew up. And Chappell has been doing it for 10 years. And this year, like we started working with her in February, and I didn't even really bat an eye at partnership at that time. It was cool. But after she did Coachella, and then like right around that, after that time, she just started blowing up and she became like the headliner basically at every major festival, even though she was billed, when she was billed, she was like really low on the bills, but she broke, like Lollapalooza's attendance records and all this for people watching her show. And like you'll probably, I don't know if your phone's probably listening to us, you'll go on Instagram and you'll see that like you'll start getting these festival crowd videos, which became a thing over the summer, all the festivals where they showed like just the insane crowds that were showing up for performances. And we partnered with her kind of like one campaign after another this year on Propeller. She was supporting LGBTQ rights. And so that partnership happened at the right place, right time for us, and got to ride that wave with her. And it became a year that broke all of our records just in terms of impact and participation in our campaigns and all of that because of the partnership we had with Chappell's. Definitely exciting to see that. Very excited for her. And then also just how much she was able to do simple things, but really use her platform for all of it for something she cared about. And fortunately did that through us with Propeller.
There's this crazy, I think, like collision of worlds happening. And it's been happening for a while, but I think we're hitting fever pitch, right? This convergence of activism, culture, and purpose, right? Purpose, I say that cynically in a way, because I think there's purpose in the professional world and the corporate world, and then there's a purpose that regular people feel in their day-to-day lives. We'll talk a little bit about this sort of convergence later on, but in general, are you finding that this year people are really coming back to see shows, are really coming back seeking live experiences? To me personally, it feels like the first year since the pandemic really ended that we've lived a full summer. Last year was still people were like, is it over? I'm not really sure what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think that last year felt pretty good, but it was definitely like you're saying, I mean, there's a bit of a wave from time to time, especially like for what we do, which involves a lot of artist meet and greets and things like that. For a while, it was a great excuse for artists to not have to do anything extra. These campaigns with us and have to find things that didn't involve meeting them or what have you, which I also fully understand, like, you don't want to get COVID and have to cancel your tours
Mm,
or appearances or
mm,
whatever. But this year I can't think of any instances where that was a thing, other than maybe some band members getting it and or whatever it might be, where that impacted in isolated ways. But I'd say yes and no. Like, I think that the flip of it is, like, when concerts started happening, it was like such a demand for it. And
mm,
we've been working with the Red Rocks for a few years now, and like they used to do 60, I think 60 to 80 shows a season, and now they do close to 200. And so like their whole calendar is just jam packed, where it didn't used to be like that. And so there's a lot more tours that are happening. And for a while, I think a lot of those tours were just people wanting to be out once they
mm,
could be. And now it seems like it's ticket buying behavior has shifted a little bit, and this also could just be like the younger generation's behavior, but people are waiting till the last minute to buy tickets, typically, other than like a Taylor Swift tour or something, just knowing that they can, and also maybe not sure what they want to do that day or whatever. And so I think that's extremely stressful for promoters and the artists and stuff. And so you're seeing tours that got booked and then they get canceled,
mm,
and sometimes they have excuses as to why, but I think most of the time just because it's not selling. And even if maybe it would start selling, it's too much panic, so they got to pull out. And so I think there's a bit of that happening. It's like you're seeing some of the biggest shows and attendance numbers ever, and then you're also seeing some of these things that people thought were surefire bets that are just not performing in sales.
You were saying there's a wide range of, not maybe not a wide range, but there's extremes, right? There are tours that are being booked that are canceled last second because people aren't, the ticket buying behavior has shifted. But there's also people are going out and spending much more money than ever before. And it feels like to me, and I don't understand if there's a correlation between, or maybe, ticket buying behavior has shifted, but it feels like to me, artists, without the big ones, without offering a substantial amount more, are charging insane ticket prices. And it just feels to me that it's like the price gouging that I'm seeing for some of the biggest bands out there, Taylor Swift included, like Coldplay and all these guys. I'm like, and Oasis, fuck that. I'm not paying $5,000 for you to hear Wonderwall for the 15,000th time, even though I like Oasis. Like, what is actually happening? Why is the production ballooning as well, or is just the ticket prices that are like they can, so they do?
I think it's all of that, and I think it depends on who you're asking as well,
Mm,
because some people say it ultimately comes down to the artists, and the artists would never admit that. Most things get blamed on the ticketing fees, and I think that I'm not an expert on ticketing by any means, but I think that there's definitely both things that could be at play, where the artists are demanding a lot of money, and the promoters seem like it would be a incredible
mm,
return potentially, but it turns out it's not as much as in some instances. And so the ticket prices go up, and the fans are the ones that end up paying for it. There's also scalpers and all the other stuff they got to deal with, and bots and stuff, and it's just a lot of challenges in
mm.
that space.
Did you guys do Red Rocks this year?
We did, yeah. We were at almost every Red Rock show.
So maybe
I personally was not at many of them, so I
right.
didn't really get to see very much myself, but the team was there.
You have the luxury of not being at every one of your shows, given that you worked very hard to set up the company. Maybe this may be a good place to start introducing what Propeller is. Maybe tell us a little bit what Propeller is, the history of it, and then what does a typical campaign look like? You mentioned, sorry, you'll have to say the artist name one more time. I'm now a crusty millennial hosting a podcast. Uh, yeah, so tell us a little bit about Propeller, and then what does a typical big campaign look like? In this case, you said it took a year. It's a year in the making. Give us the mechanics of that.
Yeah, I'm happy to give you further background if you wanted on how Propeller came to be in the first place. But what
Yeah.
Propeller is a platform that helps artists and influencers and really anyone that has an audience. So it could be a brand or a festival or a venue, leverage that audience for causes that they care about. And it's all done by appealing to the self-interest of those fans. And so typically, if you're an artist, that's going to be something that's related to you as an artist, like giving the opportunity to meet them, earning their concert tickets, sign memorabilia, merchandise. We use all those things as carrots or like as incentives to get people to pay attention, to click, come, and then take whatever action that we're trying to get them to take to support the causes that the artist wants to support. And a lot of times what that looks like is we do a lot of sweepstakes currently and always have in our history, but the idea being that you can take action for a chance to win. the more actions you're taking, the more you can increase your chances of winning. Chappell Roan was the artist that you were asking about. So Chappell, the idea of winning a trip to go to Bonnaroo, for example, and getting VIP passes and all expense paid trip to go and then meet Chappell as well while you're there. And for her cause was LGBTQ rights. And so we partner with the Human Rights Campaign, and you're able to sign a petition and or make a donation or become a monthly donor or take these other actions that help you learn about the cause and support the cause. And by doing so, you're increasing your chances of winning that trip. Ultimately, the winner is selected at random, but you can increase your chances of winning. And those campaigns come together in all sorts of different ways, all sorts of different time frames. And so sometimes it's literally like a few days before a tour starts, you might get an opportunity. Sometimes been talked about months in advance, and we kind of know what's coming. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty complicated. I'm happy to go through any of the details that you want. I don't want it to be boring, but it looks all different ways. But one thing I would say is that the best campaigns that we do are ones that are authentically driven by the talent. So whenever the artist is really passionate about something and like they really want to go big with something versus like, yeah, I'm happy to do it. It's a favor or whatever, and I'll support the cause, but like I'm not really gonna go all in. It's just like you can kind of we can do a meet and greet. I'll let you promote it on my channel. I'll promote it, all that stuff. But versus someone that like really gets behind it, and I just think that the fans can tell in those instances. It just feels more genuine and comes through. And in those campaigns, we tend to see even with the smaller artists, like being able to make as much of an impact as a really big artist if they are really leaning in.
Yep. We'll talk about the genesis story of Propeller later in the pod. But I'm curious, what is interesting? The first time I might have mentioned this story to you, first time I heard of Propeller, I didn't really pay attention to the name, but I noticed something cool because one of my favorite bands of all time is Gojira. And it was a few years ago, I think they frequently talk about their like environmental stewardship programs. They talk about the Amazon a lot. They talk about conservation a lot. And the campaign that they ran was for the guitar, signed by Joe Duplantier, which I fucking love that band. But the campaign, when I went to the page, it was really interesting. Again, I didn't pay attention to the name, but then years later, when I met you, I'm like, whoa, hold on. I feel like I've seen this before. And sure enough, of course, it was Propeller. I say that because what's an example of, let's say, a super successful campaign and the cause related to that campaign, and why was it successful?
Let's talk about Gojira for a second, because that was a very successful campaign. And I had heard of Gojira. I didn't know that much about them. And for those who don't know you, they're a French metal band. They're great, but it's not what you'd think would be. We work with like Justin Bieber or something. You don't think Gojira is going to be this. At least I didn't. Maybe you did as a fan. But that was an example where their label reached out, asked about doing this campaign. They said the band wanted to raise $75,000. I'm like, all right, good luck, but we'll give it a shot. And
So hold on, you said good luck because is that too low or too high? Like, what's the average campaign?
I thought that was going to be high for them, just because it's like this
obscure,
it's sort of metal, niche, and and it just didn't. But that was an example where Joe personally reached out to all his friends and got them to participate in it. So we had stuff from Ghost and Metallica and Guns N' Roses and like I can't even remember off the top of my head. A lot of different artists participated and gave really great items. So versus them just signing a brand new guitar that didn't have any meaning, like we're getting like I forget. I think it was like the drum that the Deftones drummer used on, I don't know if it was White Pony, one of their big albums like from a while ago, and like handmade guitars and stuff. And like Joe was, it was also really nerve wracking because Joe was like going through and analyzing Propeller and being like, I don't like this airplane icon that you have. Can you change it to this? And like wanted all these little details changed. And then we did the campaign and they really dug into promoting. They made it part of the rollout of their music and were just a force for getting it out there. And again, he was creating his own videos. We were not giving him scripts. It was just all driven by them for what they wanted to support. And so I think they ended up raising 330 grand or something in that campaign, which again was just super impressive. And I like was blown away by how impactful it ended up being. So that is a great example. Another one we talk about often is Ali and AJ. They've been around a while. They were like big in their teens, and then they had to come back. I had never heard of them, and that was one where like again they wanted to support. I think it was the Trevor Project the first time, and They had the idea they want to say something from stage every night, and we did a call to action where they could text in, people would just sign a petition, and I had the option to donate, and they did a quick meet and greet for the fans after every show. And they've now raised like hundreds of thousands of dollars with us, and it's playing to anywhere from 1,000 people to like 2,500 people a night. A lot of tours we do are arenas or amphitheaters or stadiums sometimes, and sometimes they don't raise that much just because it's just a really simple thing, but because they actually like gave a heartfelt call to action that was genuine from stage, and they had a really great prize that was involved in it. They've been incredibly impactful, and more so than artists that are theory have 10 times the followers or whatever that they do.
Amazing. I'm sure we'll talk more about Propeller and the Genesis story. Before we get there, I'm going to take a detour, and this will open up, I think, the core of the conversation and why I wanted to chat with you about. Is that I think when in our last call you had stated that psychedelics underpins social impact and the culmination of your work in the last 15 years. Why do you feel that?
I mean, I think I got into psychedelics in high school, as many of us did, and I got really into it. I mean, it wasn't like abusive or anything like that, but to the point where I had, black light posters all over my basement in my parents' house and just like
Classic. Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I did my high school term paper on the electric acid test and just like really played an impact on my life. But I always treated it with respect. And it was not just to like go to a party or something like that. I mean, granted, it was experimental and for things like that did occur, but I definitely like saw the bigger point in all of it. And I was supposed to go to school for computer science. Instead, I joined a band and we started touring and all that, like immediately after I graduated high school. And my bandmates had never done psychedelics, and they like thought it was funny that I was interested in them. But eventually they tried them and they had really life-changing experiences. They grew up like in pretty strict Christian families, and they were at a point where they weren't really sure what they believed anymore. And like I think psychedelics just helped them see also like the bigger picture in all this, where like they could take what was valid from their upbringing and what wasn't and separate it and figure out who they really were. And it really impacted us then as a touring band, where we were not a big band, but we toured the US and Europe. And in those instances, like people would want to meet us or we do interviews and all of that. And it just felt like even at a small level, you have an opportunity to use your platform for something bigger. And we really got hooked on that idea of like how music and how an artist has a platform and how you can do something really positive with that. And so psychedelics, I think, helped us land in that place. And then eventually, when I didn't think my band was going to make it, I left the band to go pursue doing that work with established artists and more or less just trying to be a cheerleader and make it easy for these artists to use their platform more, especially the ones that I knew were interested in that and finding effective ways that they could. And so somewhere along the lines there in my band days, like another band we were touring with and my drummer were talking about, they're talking about, I guess, like a way to describe it would be like how there are all these different avenues to God, and they might not have used the word God, but it was just saying like drumming for me is my spiritual practice and stuff. And I'm like, this is a big part of like what I believe in. Where are you getting this information from? And they told me about Ram Dass. And that was the first time I had anyone like articulate these things that had percolated in my brain or things I thought I had landed on in different psychedelic journeys along like over the course of years. And so I got really interested in Ram Dass and eventually like Eckhart Tolle and Alan Watts and these different teachers. And that really set me down the path of caring about this intersection of social impact and leveraging music and culture to help generate it.
You did grow up, however, in a conservative family, religiously conservative and politically conservative. I think you mentioned
not so much religiously, but just politically. Yes.
Okay. Was it religious? Did you have a religious upbringing?
No, I mean, we were the type of family that like I went to Sunday school. I was raised Catholic and we'd go to church on Christmas and Easter, but it was not like a big part of our identity other than feeling like this is what you do. But it wasn't like beyond that. I wouldn't, some instances from my mom's side and going to Catholic school and all of that, but it was not like my bandmates who grew up with like their fathers and stuff were like mom's music pastor and like they were very deep in that world. It was pretty light on our side.
What was did you sense a sort of a intersection between the semi-religious, or at least let's say culturally religious, right, and the political orientation, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that being Republican is bad. I don't, frankly, I don't trust any politician. But what was that like? It's having that political orientation growing up. And then, of course, I think psychedelics, these things tend to change you from your default. Again, doesn't mean you become a Democrat or a progressive. It just means that things tend to change as your political, ideology changes. How do you process your upbringing from that perspective?
I think on the political side of things, highly talked about, like with my family, it was just assumed. I think that most of my town, I grew up in York, Pennsylvania. It's like a small central Pennsylvania town, and it's pretty conservative as a whole. And so I think when you're in your own bubble, you don't really question things
Right,
as
right,
much
right.
because it's just like, oh, that's what your friends and your friends' parents and everyone else, that's what they subscribe to. And so
Mm,
I wasn't really like, it just didn't crossed my mind very much. And I think I started getting more interested in politics when we went to Europe for the first time as a band, because it was when Bush was in office and we were, this is like 2003, and we're over in Europe and talking to different people in these countries, and they would be like, "You guys are cool, but can I swear on here?"
yeah, of course. Please.
they're like, "You guys are cool, but fuck your government."
Yeah.
And I'd be like, "Wow, okay, I didn't realize that people actually didn't like us. It just
Mm,
was, still very early days of the internet and stuff, that it just wasn't like we are on even on MySpace in those days." And so didn't really have a sense too much of what else was. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but didn't really have a sense of what all was going on. And initially, I think I still like subscribed that like the conservative or the Republican side is still like part of what I'm affiliated with. And so even when I would see some artists that were like supporting John Kerry and stuff at the time, I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I
mm.
wasn't really that invested in all of it. It just, I think there's a lot of processing to figure out like why people didn't like us or our government and what was really happening. And most of that didn't shift for me until I went to California, which was a whole different bubble, as you'd imagine.
Whole different bubble is right. It's interesting. I feel I grew up in the Middle East during the Gulf War, and then obviously I moved to Canada in 2004, so it's following 9/11, and I experienced the kind of politicization, depolarization, and I feel like it's all coming back. It's so awfully familiar what's happening. The sort of the kind of like aggressive fascist politics, and that's not just from the right; it's from the left as well, particularly as it relates to foreign policy and the genocide in Gaza and what's happening. Um, I'm curious, what are you seeing that kind of political action or inaction inspire? Like, how is it affecting the music and the culture and what you're seeing on Propeller's end?
It's been interesting to witness from, I think, like doing this work since 2008 was when I left the band and started working in social impact. And back then there were a few artists that had their own foundations and stuff.
Yeah.
Like Incubus was an early one, Linkin Park, like some of these artists that were really big in those years, but it wasn't common. And it was just like, I don't know if this rings a bell at all, but the Pepsi, instead of doing the Super Bowl the one year, they did this whole Pepsi, can't remember what it was, Pepsi, some sort of challenge where they gave away millions of dollars to people with ideas and nonprofits and stuff for all philanthropic purposes. And it was just starting to become more and more in the zeitgeist of people were starting, oh, everyone now has a cause, but it wasn't still the norm. And over the years, it became more and more. You get into the Trump era, and it just started to be like, I wasn't begging people to participate in
Mm,
things we were doing. Like people were looking for outlets and what they could do to support different causes. And then I think really as you got into 2020, election year, COVID, George Floyd, who knows what else.
mm,
So much was happening. That was the year that our whole business had to change, because so much of what we did revolved around in-person experiences with concerts and festivals. And we couldn't do any of that anymore. And we're like, we're going to go under. But instead, it ended up being our biggest year. And it was
mm.
just being the sad truth is that, like, when the more tumultuous of times we're in, the more Propeller has people that want to do things. And so it's like, in a lot of ways, good for business as much as I don't wish that in the world by any means, no matter what. And it's not what I look for. But then you go back to this year, I think that a lot had changed over the course of the 4 years. People start to forget about the Trump era a lot. People also start to see a lot of bad things, like you're pointing out on the left. And so a lot of artists, I think earlier this year, were, even if it's nonpartisan, I don't think I want to touch voting as a thing. I think people were like afraid to bet on their own horse, or even if they don't make it partisan, their fans are still going to assume it's one way or the other, and it's just going to cause unneeded backlash or something. And our stance on it was like always about the issues. It wasn't about a specific candidate this year or anything like that. It was like, here's the things that we stand for. If you support these issues, like you should probably make sure you're registered to vote or get registered if you're not. And the time, especially with Biden, it's like, if you don't like Biden, that's fine. But if you care about whatever this issue that you care about, like let that be your reason to go and vote. And I think things changed a lot the more the election picked up this year and people started to pick their sides or whatever, or just wanted to do something, maybe because I think certain things were screaming in their face a little bit more and they were less sheepish about it than they were earlier in the year. But
It's interesting, right? Like, I think politics should always be about what you want, not what you don't want. And that's become the mainstream politics now. It's like, oh, okay, now if you don't vote for me, that guy wins and that guy hates you. Like, it's such utter nonsense. It's all this energy being spent hating rather than saying this is what we demand, this is what we want. And so I like talking about it this way. The way you framed it is, it's about the issues. Politics and parties should be like cable. Pay for only what you want. This sort of like, because politicians are career politicians. It's not like you have a guy who's like, okay, I'm going to come here for 4 years and that's it. I'm going to quit. So I'm going to either make as much money as I can or maybe really try to do some shit, right? Instead, you have these fuckers who are like multimillionaires who will never leave Congress, who will die a fossil and die rich. But yeah, enough of that mini rant here. I'll come back to that rant later on.
I'm with you on all that, though. I fully agree. It's so frustrating to be in a spot again where it's like, yeah, let's pick the lesser of two evils that we think is the lesser of two evils, and it's like, who really knows? And it's yeah, it's just a sad state. That's like that's where we are in the U.S. at least.
And I will say this though, I think we get the politics we deserve. There is something about what the hopeful thing about all this is that you remember and recognize that everything that we have, women's rights, desegregation of schools, minimum wage, all this was fought for. None of this was given. Nothing is given. And I think the disillusionment comes from the fact that, oh shit, why isn't it given? I grew up in first of all Saudi Arabia and then Bangladesh, and grew up with like political violence and authoritarianism most of my life. And so I'm not surprised by any of it. I feel actually hope when people break out of their spells. Consumerism, capitalism is a spell, really. Above all, it's a sort of like a spellbinding technology, this ideology that you can consume forever, buy anything, and buying things will solve your problems. It's a spell above all. So when the spell breaks, there's this liminal space where we have to find a new place, something new to congeal to or find meaning in. And so art and culture is really meaningful. But anyway, let me come back to this point later on, because we're going to talk about what you're doing with Portal now. I love what you're doing with Portal, and we'll come back to it. One thing that I want to touch on is that you were going to go to university or college for computer science. Instead, you said, fuck it. I'm going to go tour with a band. I'm going to pursue music instead. And your grandfather, I think, is involved in this sort of inflection somehow. Give us a sense of why the quote unquote extreme pivot.
Partially opportunity and right place, right time. I think that for me, I wanted to play in a band. I did play in a band. I played in a really crappy band in high school that was my band, and I loved it. And I like wanted to do that. That's what I wanted to do. I started playing guitar when I was 10, and I just loved to have had that opportunity. I saw bands go that I knew that ended up making it big, and it just felt like that gave me hope and that this is possible and stuff. And so senior year, someone I knew, they were starting a new band, and like they were light years ahead of anything I had done in terms of professionalism and quality of songs and all of that. And they invited me to join their band like March of my senior year, and they were going on tour actually like with a bunch of metal bands. We were not a metal band, but it was a sold out sold out tour. And so I still was enrolled to go into college and stuff. And about halfway through that tour, I think it was like somewhere in Washington State. And I called my parents and I'm just like, I think I'm going to pursue this band thing instead of going to school. And they were scared, but they were kind and supportive.
Mm,
And they said, why don't you just defer for a year? And then every year I just would defer another year and eventually just
mm,
stopped. But it came to a head for me because of, I think a lot of the attitude for me in my life is why I go for these things is just because I think during a psychedelic trip when I was in high school, I'd like have this memory of lying on the street in my neighborhood with my friends, like looking up at the stars and just thinking about my grandfather. My grandfather was very successful in his life and he was ran a business and he had a great life. I mean, he traveled the world, he did all kinds of things, but basically he retired, made a lot of money, and then 5 years later he died.
mm,
And so I just had it in my head since I was in high school that I don't want to live a life toward the end of my life. And I'm going to aim for retirement to be the time when I do all the things I really want to do. And so it was like, why don't I just pursue the things that I'm truly passionate about
mm,
now?
mm,
And fortunately, my parents, like I said, they were very supportive and they were scared, but they were like, I couldn't have done it without them allowing me to. My bandmates had very different stories. My other bandmate, like, parents were not supportive. He had to basically rebel and just go off on his own, be cut off, and take a whole different path. And eventually, they came back around. But I he had the challenging situation. Mine was challenging for different reasons, but fortunately, like supported, and that's really been my MO still to this day with anything career.
mm.
And I think all goes back to that feeling from high school.
What were your challenges and what were your parents like? What do you think sparked the sort of reaction, like the immediate fear? Where do you think that came from?
I think that I was a decent student. I didn't apply myself that hard, but I think like there was a lot of optimism for me from my family as for what I was going to do in my life. And my dad's also a business owner and does well, and I could have taken over his business. And so if I wanted that path, I
Mm,
could have gone on that path and had something pretty turnkey that knowing I would have been okay financially. And not taking that path, not taking a traditional path of like becoming a web developer and probably being able to make a couple hundred grand a year pretty easily for a while, and going to this unknown thing that barely anyone like makes it,
yeah.
and not something they knew a lot about either. And I think that I don't know, the challenges are just like, yeah, you're a band in York, Pennsylvania, and you're trying to make it big, whatever that means. It was a weird time. It was like post Napster, fighting illegal downloads while the labels are going under and pre Spotify. And so
Mm,
like no one really knew what to do with anyone anymore. And you weren't able to get record deals very easily. And we had a lot of attention on us since I was 18, where people would come to Pennsylvania that were, you know, legit people in the music industry. And so there was promise from day one. But it was
yeah.
a lot of that over the years where it looks like, oh, we're golden, things are gonna happen, down to like that being the same kind of story for 6 years where like we grew and had a lot of great opportunities, but never really quite got got there in terms of making it a sustainable career.
When did you guys call it? When did you say, okay, it's been 6 years, I think or I'm tired, or like I want to do something else? Like what was that point?
It's any relationship. I think things ebb and flow, and ultimately you love it, and so you're gonna fight to stay in it and feel re-energized at different times. And so you have those waves. You have band members that leave along the way, and you got to find new
Mm,
ones. And any one of those things can be like whatever that breaks the whole thing. And what happened for me was I got really excited about the stuff I was saying as far as like how you're going to use music as this vehicle for something positive. And that idea was just like I couldn't escape. And that also bled into this other idea I had of a company I wanted to start, which was all related to like not fighting illegal downloads, but working with it. The whole idea was to create a platform where you could get free music and it was all supported by advertising. And it was like, again, pre Spotify. I didn't know what I was doing, but it was like that idea is what actually led me to wanting to go lead the band and pursue that and trying to create that company with a long-term goal of how all of like the cause side of things plays into it. And instead, what happened was instead of making it where like you watch an advertisement and get a free download, you watched an awareness video and you got a free download. And I did like a prototype of that and it went very well. And that's like what ended up sending me down the rest of the path. And everything I started doing with before it was like winning these meet and greets and these trips and stuff. It was all based on downloads. And then Spotify came out and you didn't have to, money, like the money for music thing was not really a good incentive any longer, since people could just have everything for $10 streaming every month.
I mean, everything came full circle, right? You did become a business owner. Do you think that there is an overlap between being an artist and being an entrepreneur?
Oh, 100%.
In what way?
100%. I think entrepreneurship is extremely creative. And it's like all you get no's more than you get yeses for everything, especially in the early days. And you have to, one, you have to be resilient, and two, you have to be creative on how you go around those roadblocks. Because if you take no for an answer, you're not going to be a successful entrepreneur. It just doesn't, like, it's
Mm.
just, there's stories of like Lincoln Park, or I think they
100,
got turned down,
100 labels or something? Yeah.
something like that. It was some
Yeah.
absurd number
Yeah.
that how many times they got rejected, and then they went on to like be this multi-platinum artist. But like anyone else who looked at them like, you guys are nuts. Like, you're clearly, no one wants you. And to go into whatever the 112th time or whatever it was, and then to get a yes, and then to go on to be one of the biggest bands in the world, it's very similar. But I think that being an entrepreneur is, I mean, if anyone's seen Silicon Valley, like, I feel like that it's such a good portrayal of the
Yeah.
journeys that
Yeah.
entrepreneurs go through at any level of success. And so I get a kick out of that, and just how it's like, anytime you think it's smooth sailing, something else pops up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a founder or as an entrepreneur, like, you didn't go into that line of work because you were an expert in the legal side of it or sweepstakes compliance, whatever it might be. You just had this idea,
Yeah.
and how many things you have to learn along the way. It's really a journey, and I really find similarities in terms of like thinking of it as an art form pretty often.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. For me, you know, I mean, you got to be an entrepreneur, and your company will grow at different stages. It'll have different needs, and so you have to be a different kind of entrepreneur, right? But the greatest benefit or sort of crossover talent, I guess you could say, from my perspective, between an artist and entrepreneur is that an early stage entrepreneur and an artist both have to hone in on that real thing inside, the innate inspiration that makes you want to do this fucking thing, despite maybe nobody believing in it, nobody seeing it, but you still want to do it. When you want to write a song, when you want to listen to a song, when you want to play music, there's nobody telling you. You're just like, this is something I have to do. That inner compulsion to do that thing. And so, like every entrepreneur in my mind, every founder is an artist, starts an artist. Where you get into trouble is that at some point you become a scientist because you're more in the act of creation. It's more about like replicating and scaling. That's a different problem set, and that's, I think, different persona. But you're right. Every entrepreneur has to find that inner artist because it's about that resilience and inspiration, holding on to that thing, that spark, which you're going to need. There are more bad days than good when you're trying to build.
Definitely.
And
definitely.
What do you think? Like, okay, so this other question that I have about being an artist or an entrepreneur is that, what do you think you pulled from being in a band, and you played in a band, you guys toured, so clearly something was working, or you tried to make it work. What are the takeaways from doing, being a band and then running a company or running a team?
I think they're very similar to what you were just describing in the resilience aspect of it. I mean, like, you're eating shit if you have a bootstrap company and you're just getting going, and like, you don't have all these things. You have luxury to just hire people, and like, it's like you're doing everything in some instances. At least that's was the path for me and anyone that didn't like go out and raise millions of dollars to start their company. And in a band, like, we were sleeping on floors and just disgusting stuff.
Being in a van that smelled like fart 24/7.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, that's it. And like, you're happy to get a $5 a day, I mean, Grand Swallow, $5 a day per diem to go get your stupid gas station burrito or something at the end of the night. There's no glamour in it other than like for the hour and a half you have your show, and sometimes there's 10 people there. It's just like, you never know. But that still is like your element of touring in a day where you have any sort of glory. I mean, I think there's an aspect of that. I mean, as for artists that are a little bit bigger, I mean, there's certainly like the manager is similar to a CEO, and there's the delegation of having your agent book your tour, and you've got your lawyer, obviously, handling your legal, and your publicist, and the band is your client, but like, they're the ones on the creative side of it, and your job is to be like the CEO. And so I've seen a lot of parallels in times where I've worked for management companies and stuff, and seen it from that side of things. And then I think for what I do now, especially in like the early days, I think that even though I was a small artist, I still think being an artist, I had perspective to think how artists think. And when I'd reach out and ask artists to do things, I felt like I had a, granted, there's endless personalities as far as how an artist might think. But generally speaking, I think that there's some through lines and being able to have that experience of when I was in a band of what would have resonated with me when I was doing it to get yeses for people to participate in their campaigns. I think that's been really helpful as well.
No, that's fantastic. And I absolutely resonated with that, building community myself. And managing a community is like managing a company. The thing is, oftentimes nobody's getting paid in the beginning, at least, and you have to find a way to inspire them, to support them, and so on. Let's go to Portal. Tell us about what Portal is, the background of it. And I think, again, Portal to me is really interesting because when we first spoke about Portal, it was this culmination, in your own words, of like psychedelics as a movement, not just as a substance, but then also bringing in elements of culture and storytelling, which is at the core of this, but also experiences. How do you monetize things like this? There's a lot of experimentation happening, and I think Portal's at the forefront of it, in my mind at least. Tell us about what Portal is. What are you guys trying to do?
Yeah, this one's always challenging for me. I mean, I think Portal at its core is a psychedelic membership club. That's really what the business model of it is, and that's what we're trying to do is build community. And so we're trying to have people that, whether you're new and you're curious, or you've maybe had some journeys but you're not really that well informed, we're trying to help you get more informed, and then also find other people that are also on a similar path to you. And so that's really what the community is about. But what we're doing is so much of it it's driven by what I describe as monthly rituals to turn inward. So we are essentially using Denver as our pilot city, and we are having monthly events in Denver that are one part psychedelic education, a talk that you might see at a conference, for example, with a thought leader, a nonprofit person, an influencer talking about some sort of subject within psychedelics, whether it's microdosing or just LSD or whatever all the different topics within psychedelics. The one we have coming up is with veterans, and so we have those talks, and then the back half of every event is more experiential. We say it's a heart opening experience, but typically it's like a ceremony type concert. It's the opportunity really to go inward, and whether you're on psychedelics or not, we don't tell you to be on psychedelics. We don't give people anything. It's like,
Right.
to me, it's like this could be your time every month where you are like, you haven't been meditating. So come meditate in the community of people that are also like care about this and are on a similar path. But if you do want to do that, you can, and you're in a safe container. And just to give you an example, like we've been working on Veronica Lightning Horse Perez in Denver. She was a big part of the movement out there for legalization, Prop 122. And she's a found speaker. She's from the indigenous community. She's been hosting our events. And then the first one we did was with Wesley Schultz and his wife from the Lumineers. And so he was part of the conversation. He played some songs, and then East Forest is also part of it. And so East Forest did a whole ceremony and showed his documentary, Music for Mushrooms. And then the last one we did was with Snow Raven, and we had Ka come in and do a Kana ceremony and then introduce people to Kana. And so we're doing these every month in Denver with the intention of then bringing this to multiple cities. And we just see it as an opportunity for people to come learn about psychedelics, find the community, and then have these opportunities to people in a room lying down flat, eye masks on, doing the whole thing, which is really what psychedelics have been to me in recent years versus going to the festivals or whatever it might be. It's really about those inner journeys and trying to give people the opportunities, again, whether they're on psychedelics or not, to have those moments. So that's a big part of it. But where it gets to be a mouthful is just we also are supporting lots of the nonprofits in the space. And that's really through what we do on Propeller. And so to me, it just fits neatly with everything we do on Propeller. We partner with Double Line Magazine. We use a lot of their sort of psychedelic 101 kind of content. And then also support lots of different organizations that are in the space, help them raise awareness and money. And to me, it's like Propeller's become one of the biggest tools for big organizations to acquire new supporters. And in the psychedelic nonprofit space, the biggest organizations are not that big, and they do not have the same level of sophistication when it comes to what they do digitally and just overall, just because they're not bringing in tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars like some of these organizations do. And so we're applying what we know from working with these groups to the psychedelic space and really just see an opportunity to really help them reach people that are not just preaching to the choir, but reaching these people who are hearing about psychedelics in the news and are curious about them and trying to educate them and bring them into it in the right
I
way.
think this part is, to me, the most impactful thing, right? Psychedelics, by virtue of being underground for so long, I think is fairly homogenous. And this by no means I mean disrespect to anybody who's like all the champions who put their life and career and everything on the line to keep this space alive despite the intense criminalization that have gone through the last 50 years. I don't mean those champions per se, but I think there's a insular pressure in this space, and we sometimes fall into this thinking that this is it, and we pat ourselves on the back, but that's not it. It's a very thin slice of the people out there who still don't know, or they think they know, or they've been propagandized and all this stuff. So I think broadening the base is extremely important. And so that's what I keep saying. It's not about psychedelics. It's not about the drug. It's about the states of mind that
Mm-hmm.
the medicine, the practice allows you to be in. To in that then that's those states of mind is what's political, right? It's not the drug. And so I really love what you're saying, what you're talking about. With that said, I think a space that is so decentralized, so to speak, and diffuse in some ways, it must be really challenging doing what you're doing. And so I'm curious about what have you learned as key insights in the work, and obviously Portal is relatively new as well, so there's a lot of experimentation left to do. What are some of the key insights you can share about what you learned from this process about building or formalizing or building a business in this particular space?
There's a few things. I mean, I think I have a couple of different directions I can take this. I think that psychedelics are the overlying mission of what we're doing that we use is saying destigmatizing the responsible use of psychedelics. And so that sort of destigmatization or normalization of psychedelics, because other people talk about this. I heard East Forest say this, and I thought it was really funny, where he was saying like every time there's something on the news about psychedelics, they're like, "Here's a trippy story for you," and they play like the tie dye backgrounds or whatever it is, and it's like that's how everyone thinks of it.
Yeah.
Versus like treating it in a serious way. There's like psychedelics, of course, there's a silly side to it. That's part of it as well, but it's really deep, meaningful inner work that happens when people are on psychedelics, and like it's should be taken seriously in that regard as well. And so even when I've reached out to certain artist teams or something, and the feedback I get, some of the first things sometimes is that they laugh. And it's just like, I know you've been impacted in a positive way by psychedelics because your whole last album was about it or whatever it might be.
This is
You know,
a
why
really
is it
good
funny
point.
when
I
I bring it
actually,
up?
I'm glad you brought this up because I was going to ask you about this. I found it ironic that more artists aren't part of this. It has become almost like devoid of art, and because of this, because like on one hand, artists are always involved in it, but is it the language that they don't find? Like, what makes it so difficult for artists to be
I'll
involved?
tell you what I think my theory is. What my theory is. So I had been doing the social impact work, and as I said, like a lot of this was started because of like it was influenced
Yeah.
by psychedelics, and like that's what sent me on this path. I was never like an activist, a do good, or any of that stuff. It just all spawned from this and consciousness, and it took me till I don't even know 3 years ago, I guess, is when we started Portal, and I'd never thought of psychedelics as a cause. You think of the environment or mental health, even, and still didn't think of psychedelics. And this includes like I started Portal with my friend Justin Beretta. Justin was in a group called the Glitch Mob, and he's known by a lot of people in the psychedelic space because he had done projects with Ram Dass, these
Mhm.
great meditation projects, and Alan Watts and Eckhart Tolle, these different people. And that Ram Dass project was something that him and I did together on Propeller. And we also did Alan Watts one on Propeller and all of that. And like we still never thought psychedelics. And just one day we're like, why are we not doing this
Yeah.
for psychedelics? And that was when Portal started. And I think that a lot of artists also do not think of psychedelics as a cause.
Mm.
They're getting hit up every day by a different organization. And then there's the ones that are really close to people in music, especially like a Music Cares or some of these ones that have long histories with artists and their teams. So that's what you think of when you think of charity or philanthropy. And I think that a big thing that we're going to do and already are doing is like saying, no, you can support heroic arts project or whatever it is. Here's a different opportunity. And I think it's gonna be a light bulb for a lot of people because they have had such profound experiences. They would like to be a mouthpiece maybe, but they just hadn't thought of it as like, oh, I can actually treat this as the cause that I'm supporting.
Totally true. And is it an accident that this resurgence is happening as we are on the verge of World War III? No, it's not.
I don't think the next thing. Yeah.
How again, how crazy is it that uh, I feel like the 60s and 70s have been defanged in a lot of ways and made it about like the frivolous partying, which I think is absolutely important. I think partying is healing. If you've done responsibly, if you've done carefully, if done safely. But it was psychedelic movement was a reflection of the insane war propaganda that was happening at that time. It's happening right now. And so to your point, rather than looking at it as a drug, but we look at it as a tool to open our minds and our hearts to keep it open. To keep it open, as in everything in the outside world, there's a pressure to like, no, fall in line, do what you're fucking told, vote the way we want you to, and so on, right? It's not an accident. It's happening for a
Yeah.
particular reason, as a response to something.
I fully subscribe to that. I mean, I think that I do set intentions and stuff if I do a psilocybin journey, and a lot of it comes down. Like a lot of times, I'm asking about stuff that I'm doing, Portal, Propeller, the combination of it. But I say that just I think that I've had times where I've thought about like not even wanting to support a lot of the causes that we currently have been supporting for a long time because I think so much of what's needed in the world is not more polarization. It's really this people as Ram Dass says, it's like the greatest action you can do for someone else is to work on yourself. And I really believe in that, that it's like the more we can raise our own consciousness, the more the collective consciousness will get raised. And the more a lot of these other issues that exist will hopefully start to go down as well, because people, as you're saying, your heart is open, your mind is open, things from a different perspective. And so I think there's nothing more important than, and it's hard to say that when there's urgent things that happen, right? There's a school shooting, there's a climate disaster, whatever it might be, that you become very reactive and the world becomes very reactive. But I think for me, there's nothing more important than this. And I'm really excited where I'm at. And I also, it's a weird juxtaposition because I feel this is the moment and I feel like this is the most important work I could be doing. And so it's really where I want to spend all my time.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think the beautiful thing about psychedelics and the medicine and the states of mind is that they're expansive. You can hold all of it. It's not one or the other. I absolutely believe to have peace, you must have justice. But to have justice, you must first be able to see and hold all the beauty and all the violence that exists in the world. So creating space in our lives is really important. It starts with us, but then it encompasses everybody else. That's where the beauty is, in my opinion. Last question. I love where this is going. What do you hope? I mean, I opened with casually talking about like we're 4 days away from Armageddon. It seems like, because in my mind, every person on this planet should be should have the right to vote in the American election.
Yeah,
because it fucks
impacts
everything.
everybody.
It
Yeah.
fucking touches everything. Unfortunately, give me a sense of like what do you hope for 2025 for the company, for yourself? To your point, we must have hope. Otherwise, what else is there, right? Where do you want to take it? And of course, we're all going back to Denver in June next year. Where do you want to see all of this go?
I mean, I think it's a lot of things you were touching on. I mean, I think also I'd say that another thing I believe is that through any tragedy comes opportunity. And so these things that you can look back in hindsight and look at these terrible situations that have happened in the world and how if that didn't happen, it might not have taken us to a place where it did actually elevate consciousness and take us to something else happening in the world that is for the greater good of humanity and for our future. And so I'm trying to keep an open mind and an open heart as to whoever goes into office and what might happen because of a result of that. And while things might get really bad for a while, whoever it is, I'm hopeful that it does what we were just saying. It leads to a place where people are sick of being polarized, realize we're stronger together, we have more in common than we do different, and see the importance of things like this, of being able to turn inward and how needed that is. And just what you said, like basically being a beacon of peace. And that's my hope. And how we get there, like I have no clue. And again, something really terrible could happen if World War III breaks out. Like I won't be surprised. I don't want it to happen, but hopefully, if we don't destroy ourselves, that leads to us. For those of us still left, that leads to something much better for where we go next. Because I think we're in such interesting times when AI and everything else that's coming into play, like we're at a really unique time in history in that regard. And we're thinking about all these other things that are so small and so shitty and bad and stuff. And we're hopefully getting to a place where crazy transformation is going to happen and things that, if hundreds of millions of people lose their job in the next whatever 3, 5, 10 years or something, like we're not gonna have a choice. We're gonna have to adapt in some way. And I could see psychedelics playing a role in us like dreaming up what the future holds. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. I'm turning 40 this month. I know you recently turned 40. And I feel like the older I get, the more I'm reminded that it's all love and compassion. It's all love. As cheesy and cliche as it sounds, it's cliche for a reason. It is just love.
there's things I've come across in the nonprofit world a lot over the years that's like about kindness or whatever. And I used to always think that was cheesy.
Yeah.
And now more than ever, I'm with you. I'm like, that's not cheesy at all. Like it can feel cheesy, but it's actually like it's everything.
It's
You don't have to
everything.
agree with people. Be kind to people. Be loving to people. Be compassionate for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I'm curious what happens. You mentioned like next June, Psychedelic Science. I hope that a lot of people come out to that and it's as successful or more successful as one last time, since it is such a major time for everybody that's interested in the space to come together and think of what's next. I also want to point out that we are doing Bicycle Day again. Bicycle Day for me is going to be something we hope to turn into a major day of awareness and fundraising for the psychedelic movement and make it a bigger and bigger thing every year. And so really excited for Bicycle Day 2025 and also what that can be used for in the future as well.
Yeah. No, I'm stoked for it. I mean, we were lucky enough to work with you guys for the last conference in Denver in 2023. Super stoked to be back and coming back to one of the core themes of this, which is you got to do what you love. And we both love it and we're not going anywhere unless World War III does break out after all, but hopefully it doesn't. Brandon, this was a fantastic conversation. Thanks so much for spending the time with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
This podcast was brought to life with the help of Carolyn Tripp on art and design. Thanks so much for listening to Minority Trip Report. If you're learning from or enjoying the podcast, please subscribe to MTR on YouTube at Minority Trip Report and follow us on Instagram at Minority Trip. It's a zero-cost way to support us and help us spread the word. Please also sign up with your email for new episode announcements, events, as well as our forthcoming newsletter. I'm your host, Rod Suraj. See you next time.